Hey everyone, welcome back to the hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we'll be talking about NVIDIA getting a bit desperate and dropping its GPU MSRPs officially. Additionally, we'll be talking about the i9-13900K leaks for the engineering sample tests that have been out there. ATX 3.0 power supplies are on the way. And we'll be talking about how our Intel Arc A380 video card review got age-gated for a day. It's 18 plus content. Adults only can know about the Intel Arc A380 GPU. Thanks, YouTube.
Thanks, Steve.
Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly. Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut and Cryonaut thermal pastes are high-performing thermal interfaces for use on CPUs and GPUs. You can bring an old card back to peak performance by repasting it and doing preventative maintenance, and Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut is ideal for water cooling and air cooling for new and old cards alike. Cryonaut paste is one of the top performing pastes for extreme overclocking with CPUs and GPUs and has been used in several world record scoring machines. Learn more at the link in the description below. First up, the saga that mostly I was tweeting about when it was going on, us getting demonetized for that A380 review. So technically, it wasn't fully demonetized, only 70% demonetized. That's right. For about 30 hours or so, we made 1/3 of the normal revenue from Google AdSense because Google decided to age-gate our video card review. Fortunately for us, YouTube has lots of employees and lots of refined processes, and for that reason, none of them were able to do anything. Eventually, one of our viewers who works for Google was able to fix the problem by escalating it internally to YouTube. So thanks to the couple of viewers who work for Google who reached out to us, because we were in a thread with 4 people at YouTube, some of them fairly high up in the YouTube partner program position, and nothing happened. The impact of that, we have benchmarks for. We'll be looking at that in a future video, but we need to get through all the hardware stuff first. So anyway, that was fun. Kind of interesting to see the actual effects of an 18 plus age gate. It is massive. We were able to get everything reinstated properly on the A380 review. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. And if you didn't see it because you clicked on it on mobile or something and it was a pain in the ass to log in to watch it, well, now you can watch it normally. Now, of course, the obvious question is, why was it age-gated? And the answer to that is nobody knows. The people at YouTube don't seem to know. We don't know. The best guess I have is that our new cyber skeleton shirt is so realistic that it flagged some sort of AI. Not even kidding. That was one of our theories. We thought it's either because of the limited shirt that I'm wearing that you can get on store.gamersnexus.net, and thank you to those of you who bought it. That was basically what made it possible for us to still profit on that video and not just lose money. Or it could have been something like how I pronounced the brand Gunnier, which I'm now pronouncing differently, mixed with A380, which is the name of multiple different things that could trigger that algorithm. We don't know. We have no idea. But if you want to pick up the shirt, you should go to store.gamersnexus.net and grab one of the cyber skeleton shirts. We launched it alongside of our Artesian Builds video, and it's been an awesome launch. These are limited. We're only doing 1 run of them, and they are a skeleton designed with a rib cage on the front made out of water cooling parts, splitters, fittings, and individually sleeved cables, things like that. Pump cap that's made out of gold for the heart. And then on the back, we have a spine made out of MOSFETs, inductors, VRM components. And genuinely, that's not just us trying to make money. I need some more data from my benchmark YouTube video, and I want to see if it triggers again. So we'll see if this is 18 plus also. Although I did change how the description lists the skeleton shirt. We put cyber skeleton together as one word to get skeleton. Well, now I'm saying it a lot in the video, so it's going to be in the transcript. Moving on. Up next, really briefly, we have a new job opening up for a part-time camera operator / editing assistant role right now. And this can expand to full-time if you're interested in splitting your work between both editing and camera operation. However, we could definitely use the assistance of a camera operator right now for about 20 hours a week. With some basic editing abilities. So things like cutting down some of the footage, but then passing it to Andrew, who will be in sort of the senior editing position to deal with the rest. If you want more backstory on the company, who we are, how many people we have, anything like that, well, we posted a hiring video a little while ago for 2 other positions, and we'll link that below. You can watch that. It's the same basic background, and then our hiring page also lists some details about the office and where you get to work. It's an awesome workplace. I love working with the team that we have here, and the quality of content everybody produces and the camaraderie we have is just unmatched. So if you want to join that team and be part of something that's really growing and doing awesome things in the PC hardware space and leading the way, then check out our hiring page. We'll link it below. Behind the scenes of Artesian Builds. So that video was a lot of fun to make, but we wanted to talk about one really common question that was in the comments, and this is something we talked about in the video. But when we talked about how customers who sent systems in for RMAs won't get those back if their systems were in the warehouses at the time they were all consolidated and auctioned off, some people were asking, isn't that illegal? Well, a couple points here. That hasn't stopped companies before, first of all. Like, for example, in our opinions, not being lawyers, it is probably illegal or potentially fraudulent, in my opinion only, to pay employees and then recall the payments and tell PayPal that it was fraud. Just an example. So, when has that stopped anyone? The answer to, but wait a minute, what about those customer systems? So backstory is, we were talking about in the Artesian video how customers who sent their computers in for repair in the final month or so might have had their systems basically locked up and been without recourse to get them back because they weren't repaired. They never went through the process because the company fired all of its staff, and then it's left sitting there. The question of what wouldn't the people buying the lot sort through it? Well, hopefully. So there's a couple of parties involved. Artesian itself was consolidated into a new entity. This is a normal part of the bankruptcy process from what we understand, something like Artesian Future Technologies. So it consolidates all the debt and assets and everything else into that organization, and then the creditors auction off the goods, and the buyer of the goods does whatever the buyer wants to do with the goods. Now, for the consumer systems that were not meant to be sold because they're owned by someone already with potentially files and personal data on them, the only way that the creditor or the buyer of the auction or anyone involved in the auction whatsoever, including Artesian's remaining single staff member that we're aware of, the only way they would know that a system belonged to someone is if it is somehow internally logged and registered. And from what we understand, the inventory and warehousing process on the West Coast was an absolute nightmare. And on the East Coast, everybody was fired and there's no one left. So building on that, now the East Coast, when we were talking to them back in February, March timeline, their staff there were telling us that in the final days, literally the last 2 or 3 days, last 12 hours even, the staff that were trying to get systems out the door to the extent that they even brought in basically a truck of components from another location so that they could try and build systems and get them shipped, even though they knew the company was closing down and they were all going to lose their jobs, which is awesome. That is such a stand-up thing to do, to basically stay on the sinking ship and say, I'm going to get as many of these out to people as I can because it's the right thing to do. And those people went on to form Phoenix PCs. We have no experience working with Phoenix PCs, but it's made of many of the same people. So they have the right ethos, which is great. And hopefully the product is good too. So what that means for the RMA system is if anything was in the West Coast warehouse, it probably wasn't inventoried or tracked very well, if at all. And it very likely could be assumed just part of the assets that were purchased. And that's the problem. So that's what we're getting at. Same for the East Coast. If they didn't get to it in time, it was consolidated, palletized, and auctioned, that's it. If there's no record of this was a customer's, then until someone turns it on, and the buyer might not, it might be the next buyer, someone like a customer of the retail shop that bought all the assets, that figures out it belonged to someone. So we were speaking with the buyer of the auction, and it is his intent, it seems, to go through things and figure out if there's any RMA units that he can identify the owner of and get them back to their owners. And we're working with him to try and facilitate some of that content and transfer of things to get them back to where they belong. But we'll follow up with you all probably in a couple weeks or a month on that because it's going to be a while. Will involve some travel for us. So you won't get an update immediately. But something that we're working on, we're talking with the buyer of the auction. He spent, we can't say exactly how much, but let's just say between $100,000 and $200,000 on the remaining assets of Artesian West and East. He got both of them. So that's some behind the scenes of what's happening next with the Artesian story. The big thing we're going to look at is just the purchase stuff. We're going to go through it with the buyer, hopefully, and identify where it needs to go. Obviously, he's going to need to make money on it too, so I don't know. It's out of my hands, but it's something we're at least involved in terms of reporting on it. Okay, next one is the crazy M.2 Tower Cooler. It's a tower cooler for M.2 SSDs. We're there now. Over-the-top M.2 heatsinks were already in the works, but this is probably the most over-the-topest by a company called Joeshark. And this is in response to the fastest M.2 devices running increasingly hot as they increase the speed and PCIe generation and density. So the new heatsink is called the M.2 and it features a familiar tower cooler design, complete with direct contact heat pipe and a 60mm fan. The fin stack measures roughly 75 by 50 millimeters, and the entire cooler is 82 millimeters tall, standing off of the M.2 drive itself, which would be sandwiched between the cold plate and a stamped metal mounting sled with thermal pads for heat transfer. Joeshark's own chart claims a massive 20 to 30 degree reduction in thermals. If we're to believe these numbers are accurate, and the results will depend heavily on the SSD cooled, somewhere two-sided for example, then they might be derived at least partially from the 3000 RPM fan and the size of the heatsink. Some quick educational points here. If you don't know, the controller does need to stay cool on SSDs. So that would be more like a CPU or a GPU where if it gets too warm, it'll start to throttle. But the flash NAND actually prefers to be warmer during operation. It will benefit the endurance or the longevity of the memory if when it's active, it runs warmer. When it's inactive, it actually prefers to be cooler. But that's one of the problems with this where, for example, if you took it to the extreme and let's say you ran your system sub-zero, we actually had a viewer ask us about this once, where the viewer was piping in cold air from outside, I believe it was during Canadian winter, and basically asked, is this gonna do anything bad? It keeps everything cool, but if you run the SSD at say 0 degrees Celsius, you are cutting its lifespan significantly for the memory, even though the controller benefits from it. Now this is not that extreme. It's not gonna get you below ambient because that's physically impossible unless you source air from somewhere else or liquid nitrogen or whatever. Just something to be aware of though, the controller benefits, the flash does not care if it's running cooler when it's operating. Anyway, it's not really feasible to target just the controller because all the SSD layouts are at least slightly different. So cooler manufacturers have to go for a universal approach like this one. The M.2 is currently only available on Taobao for roughly $9 to $13 US, depending on the color choice. And the biggest limitation to consider with the M.2 would be video card compatibility because it clearly extends into usable vertical space. And we bought one just for fun, really. So the way that's gonna work is I'm gonna design the thermal testing and do the test engineering, and then Mike on our team is going to run all the tests. We'll put it together and see if it's any good, just for something different and fun. Next one, NVIDIA has finally lowered the MSRP of its RTX 30 series graphics cards, and retailers have followed suit. This might look like it's a move in desperation to try and get rid of inventory before the RTX 40 series comes out, but moving on, the 3090 Ti, the 3090, and the 3080 Ti are all affected in this. Conveniently, these are also the cards we raised the alarm about when NVIDIA launched them, alongside the 3070 Ti. In our review of the 3080 Ti and 3070 Ti, you might remember, we were extremely critical because the price increase was astronomical compared to the non-Ti alternatives, and the performance increase was not astronomical. It was very small as a percentage dollars to performance increase, and it wasn't behavior that we thought should be encouraged. The only way possibly it could make sense is if you got, in any reasonable scenario, it didn't make sense, but if you could snipe a 3080 Ti brand new, and then you don't consider a like-for-like environment, and you assume all 3080s are scalped, then it's a better deal back then, but that's kind of a pointless comparison because it's not a like-for-like scenario. So anyway, we were very strongly against the 3080 and 3070 Ti's just because of how aggressive and egregious they were on the pricing. It was NVIDIA way overstepping its welcome and price. It does this every couple of years, and it has to get knocked back down, and this has happened. It happened with the 20 series and the GTX 10 series, which we'll come back to. So the 3080 Ti and 3090 Ti and the 3090 are all getting cut in price. The 3070 Ti should be cut in price as well. Not every reviewer agreed with us on this point, but I mean, I don't care about NVIDIA's interests here. I'm not here to choose their side on why they would increase the prices. it was a bad deal for consumers, and it's good that the prices are coming down, but it's not because they want to help you. So the company and its board partner customers are sitting on mountains of inventory just ahead of the RTX 40 launch. It's the RTX 20 and GTX 10 situation all over again, where when the 20 series launched, you might remember the GTX 10 series was still in high supply, and especially as mining devices flooded the market during effectively a crypto winter at the beginning of the 20 series. It's repeating itself. So we've seen this before, and we suspect that when the 40 series launches, it may be a similar situation, but we'll see. It depends on how much better the 40 series is versus the 30 series. With 20 and 10, the rasterization performance was very similar, at least in terms of the price action. And the ray tracing performance was relevant because NVIDIA didn't ship any actual games with its partners that had ray tracing for something like 55 days after launch, and we don't review promises. As for this news item today, the 3090 Ti MSRP has gone from $2,000 to $1,500, which is a staggering 25% drop. The 3090 is down from $1,500 to $1,300, and the 3080 Ti is down from $1,200 to $1,100. Current pricing on Newegg and Amazon reflects this change, even for high-end board partner cards. Now, to sweeten the deal in the same way you would sweeten rat poison, NVIDIA has also introduced a new game bundle. This is something that AMD has been doing with its cards as well, because both of the companies are desperate right now. NVIDIA's new bundle is called, It's called Face Your Demons. This could be an apt name for NVIDIA if the recent rumors about GPU overstock have any truth to them. Right now, if you buy a 3080 or higher, followed by the redemption process, you can get game codes for Ghostwire Tokyo and Doom Eternal, along with its 2 Ancient Gods DLCs. But GN, why are you salty about this and calling it rat poison, you might ask? Well, NVIDIA calls this 4 games, except it's 2. The other 2 games are DLC for one of the first 2 games. Doesn't count, NVIDIA. It's not the same. And NVIDIA, genuinely, calling 2 DLC add-ons games is harmful to the very trust you are trying to build right now. It serves no purpose other than a destructive one. So probably best to not do that. All right, up next, tech reviewer Extreme Player has released a video on Bilibili of testing what he claims is an Intel Raptor Lake i9-13900K engineering sample, with Raptor Lake being the 13th gen of Intel CPUs. So this engineering sample showed 8 performance cores and 16 efficient cores. It was tested against the Alder Lake 12900KF, and turbo speeds for the P cores showed as 5.5 gigahertz all-core and 5.8 gigahertz with 2 cores active. For cache, L3 was reported at 35 megabytes and L2 at 32 megabytes. This is up from the 12900KF's 30 megabytes and 14 megabytes respectively. Now, these tests, again, were done on an engineering sample. We've had engineering samples in the past that were basically the same as retail, and then we've had them also with significant features removed or deactivated. So this may not be representative of what's actually coming out. Testing was performed on an ASUS ROG Maximus Z690 Extreme, which would have just gotten basic support for Raptor Lake. No gaming tests were run, but there was an array of synthetic tests. So performance uplift over the 12900KF was reportedly at roughly 9% higher average single thread and 35% average higher multi-thread. While these results are interesting if true, they may not reflect the final performance figures, so be sure to check our review when that one comes out. Up next, EVGA has seen the recent surge in interest in transient power spikes on upcoming GPUs, and it's tipping its marketing towards it, this time with some power adapters. So EVGA's new PowerLink connectors are the 41S and the 52U. The 41S is for the 3090 Ti FTW3 only, and the 52U is only for the Kingpin 3090 Ti. So they might as well hand make them at that point. There's not going to be that many. The 41S provides conversion from 4 PCIe 8-pin power connectors, and it converts them to 1 PCIe 12-pin high power connector directly connected to the video card. For the 41S, it also has ARGB lighting, and it has some filtering capacitors that are built into it that EVGA claims helps with things like transient spikes and power stability, at least according to them. The 52U does the same thing, sans the RGB, and plus 1 more connector on each side, making 2 12 pins. So we're now at a motherboard's worth of pins on a video card. And there's also a connection for 5 8 pins. Or 40 pins. That's where we are. EVGA markets these as a solution for power stability, cable management, and airflow. Cable management could be argued for, but there's no meaningful benefit to airflow whatsoever here. And no, moving some cables out of the way for the video card don't actually make an impact. EVGA's own image of the PowerLink 41S installed shows a mess of PCIe power cables sticking out at random. It might be more challenging to cable manage with these than without them. Now, we're not likely to test these at this point. It's just not really worth it, but it's out there. If you have a 3090 Ti FTW3 or Kingpin, this might be a fix for your cabling or something. The Kingpin version is only available as a $2,500 bundle right now with an EVGA power supply, the Supernova 1600 watt power supply, the P2. So you shouldn't really be dealing with spike problems too much regardless, unless you're actually doing extreme overclocking or something, at which point you should probably run 2 power supplies. So if you buy the PowerLink 41S, it's $60. There's no separate page for the 52U though. Up next, keeping up with the high-powered theme, ATX 3.0 power supplies are finally on the way. Power supply manufacturers are starting to reveal their upcoming ATX 3.0 compliance power supplies. And as a reminder, the ATX 3.0 spec includes some language about higher transient load spike tolerance, as well as PCIe Gen 5 connections for variable PCIe power limiting and up to 600 watts on one 12 plus 4 pin cable. We previously covered MSI's AI 1300P and similar power supplies coming out, and now Thermaltake has officially announced its new lineup of ATX 3.0 compatible power supplies, with them ranging 750 watts up to 1650 watts for the flagship, and that's in the Tough Power iRGB Plus line. It's a titanium option. For SFX form factor, Thermaltake also has a 750 watt, 850 watt, and 1000 watt set of models, and there's actually a 1000 watt SFXL, although the previously mentioned ones are all SFX 3.42 and ATX 3.0 standard compatible or compliant. Other companies like Seasonic are releasing power supplies that aren't ATX 3.0 but have the new 12 VH power cable, either with the new connector on both ends or converting from 2 8-pins on the power supply side. As far as basic power delivery is concerned, this is fine. The 4 additional pins on the 12 VH power connector only terminate to ground on 2 pins and are open on 2 pins. The second 2 pins are for signaling data between the device and the power supply, but that hasn't yet been implemented yet for any power supply that we've heard of. Now, all of that said, you should be aware that just because a new power supply has a new cable doesn't mean it's automatically ATX 3.0 or PCIe Gen 5 compliant. Up next, the ghost of Spectre is still with us in the way of Retbleed, a new speculative execution CPU vulnerability affecting both Intel and AMD CPUs. This was discovered by the ComSec group, a group of security researchers at ETH Zurich, and both AMD and Intel have published security bulletins regarding the vulnerability. This new exploit is related to the older Spectre attacks due to exploiting the actual mitigation for Spectre, called Retbleed. The researchers found that they could trigger conditions to manipulate Retbleeds into giving them access to protected parts of memory, and the researchers outlined that exploit here. They said, quote, "We have found that we can trigger the microarchitectural conditions on both AMD and Intel CPUs that forces returns to be predicted like indirect branches. We also built the necessary tools to discover locations in the Linux kernel where these conditions are met. We found that we can inject the branch targets that reside inside the kernel address space, even as an unprivileged user. Even though we cannot access branch targets inside the kernel address space, branching to such a target results in a page fault. The branch prediction unit will update itself upon observing a branch and assume that it was legally executed, even if it's to a kernel address." ComSec goes on to explain the differences in their approach for AMD and Intel systems, but the fundamentals are the same. The researchers have verified that Retbleed works against Zen 1, Zen 1 Plus, and Zen 2 on the AMD side, and Gen 6 through 8 on the Intel Core side. Mitigations for Retbleed are already possible, but ComSec's predictions indicate a potential performance loss of 14 to 39%, and Phoronix has already confirmed performance hits in its own article, and you can read that or ComSec's paper for more information. Up next, just really quickly, ASUS has released some Intel Raptor Lake BIOSes. These are early revisions. They add Raptor Lake or 13th gen support for Z690 motherboards that are already out. This reconfirms what we already knew, which is that Intel Raptor Lake will be available on existing Z690 boards, and these will socket into the existing LGA 1700 sockets. So some other B660, H670, and H610 boards were also announced for a July 15th release by ASUS, and ASRock similarly has its own updates that are Raptor Lake enabled, and MSI will be following suit soon after. This mostly reconfirms what we already knew, which is that DDR4 remains supported on Raptor Lake because it's supported on Alder Lake, and they are intercompatible, and also confirms that it's just an in-socket upgrade. ASUS notes that installing the initial BIOS versions is basically only for compatibility, and it shouldn't be done for performance testing. Up next, Samsung has launched some new GDDR6 24 gigabit per second memory. This is on its third generation of what it calls 10 nanometer class process, and it also calls this 1Z, also known as 1Z, for those of you who know Hardware Unboxed. Not actually sure if he says Z or not, but he probably should. And of course, the singular he, when referring to Hardware Unboxed, refers to the collective singular entity that forms when Steve and Tim combine their powers to become the Hardware Unboxed superhero. Not really sure where I was going with that, but they'll appreciate it, and that's all that matters. Hello, Steve and Tim. So Samsung claims that its new GDDR6 is 30% faster than the previous generation's 18 gigabits per second. What? How do they do it? 24 happens to be 33% bigger than 18. Amazing. Now in reality, when you put this memory onto future GPUs, it's not going to be as linear as just they're instantly 30% better. Of course, there's more to it than that. But the speed does contribute in bandwidth-bound situations especially. Now instead of confusing metrics like gigabits or terabytes or terabits per second, Samsung has, of course, reintroduced its very popular and very well-known FHD-MPS, or Full HD Movies Per Second, one of the most universally accepted and well-understood metrics for speed in the entire industry. Samsung says that this memory can do 275 Full HD movies per second on a fully loaded graphics card. How does that compare to other ones? We don't know. Regardless of the unhelpful unit of measurement, the performance uplift on this new G6 will be a help to the next generation of video cards, which should be coming out later this year. And finally, Silverstone has another one of its extremely niche products. This is an M.2 add-on card. It's an ECS07 as the product name, and it has a SATA 3 controller built onto an M.2 card running off of 2 lanes of PCIe Gen 3 to a J-Micron JMB 585 controller, which gives you a couple of SATA ports off of an M.2 card. So kind of it's one of the cool Silverstone things they do, where at trade shows they always have a wall of random stuff. Most of it not particularly useful, but all of it interesting. And this falls in line with that. It's not a big market in terms of options, so if you need more SATA ports, this might be a way to do it. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, and we'll see you all next time.